"Do not pity me," the Duke said, the moment Helena stepped into the drawing room. "If you have come to pity me, you may turn around and go back to wherever Lady Ashford found you." Helena Croft stopped just inside the door. The room was vast and shadowed, the heavy curtains drawn against the afternoon, and the man who had spoken sat in a tall chair by the cold hearth with his face turned toward the empty grate. She could see why the servants whispered. A long pale scar ran from his temple down across his cheekbone, the legacy of the carriage accident that had taken his sight 2 years before, and his eyes, dark and unfocused, looked at nothing at all. She did not turn around. "I have not come to pity you, your grace," she said, in the same even tone she might have used to remark on the weather. "I have come to read to you, to manage your correspondence, and to be your companion, as your aunt has engaged me to do." Pity was not mentioned in the terms. There was a silence. She saw his head tilt the smallest fraction, the way a man turns toward an unexpected sound. "Lady Ashford engaged you," he repeated, "knowing that I have dismissed 4 companions in as many months." "She mentioned it," Helena said. "She also mentioned that the last one wept when she saw your face, and that you have not forgiven her for it. I assure you, I do not intend to weep." It was a bold thing to say, perhaps too bold, and she half expected to be sent away for it, but the scared Duke of Belmonte did something she had not expected. The hard line of his mouth twitched just once, as though somewhere far beneath the bitterness a man who used to laugh had stirred in his sleep. "Sit, then, Miss Croft," he said. "We shall see how long your resolve outlasts the others." So she sat, and her time at Belmonte began. The house was a beautiful tomb. It had been one of the great houses of the county once, and the bones of that grandeur remained, the painted ceilings and the gilded mirrors, and the long gallery hung with the portraits of dukes who had been feared and admired in their day. But the curtains stayed drawn, and the fires stayed low, and the servants moved through the rooms as though afraid to be seen, and at the center of it all sat a man who had decided that, because he could no longer look upon his own face, the world need not look upon it either. Helena set about her duties without ceremony. She read to him in the mornings history and poetry, and the long political letters from London that he could no longer read himself. She did not soften her voice when she read of battles or of grief, and she did not skip the lines about light, and looking and seeing that other companions had nervously omitted. When she came to such a line she read it plainly, and once, when she finished a poem that spoke of a man watching the sunrise over the sea, she heard the Duke draw a slow breath in the dark. "You did not stop," he said. "It is a beautiful poem," she answered. "You would not have wanted me to stop merely because it spoke of something you can no longer do. You can still hear the sea, your grace. I should think a man love the sound of a thing as much as the sight of it." He said nothing for a long moment, then quietly, "Read it again." She read it again. There was an evening in that first fortnight when she nearly lost her resolve. She had stayed late, finishing a chapter, and when she rose to go she heard him say her name in the dark, not as a master summons a servant, but as a man speaks who is afraid of the answer. "Miss Croft. The others, they did not leave because I dismissed them, not truly. They left because they could not bear to be near me. I heard them, you know. The blind hear a great deal. I heard them whispering in the corridors about the monster they had been engaged to read to." His jaw was tight. "I tell myself I do not care. I find I am a poor liar, even to myself." Helena set down the book. She crossed the dim room and stood before his chair, close enough that he would feel her there. "Then hear this also, your grace," she said, "since you hear so much. I have read to a great many difficult people in my time. Querulous old women, gouty old men, a baronet who threw his soup at the wall when he was displeased. I have never once been near a monster. I have been near a great deal of fear, dressed up as temper. I should think a man who has lost his sight has rather a lot to fear, and rather a lot of right to his temper." She paused. "But I am not afraid of you, and I am not going to whisper in your corridors, and I am not going to leave. So you may stop bracing for it." He was quiet so long she thought he would not answer. Then lo, why do you not leave? Because, Helena said simply, no one else has ever needed me quite so much, and pretended quite so hard that they did not. I find I cannot resist a thing like that. She heard him exhale, something loosening in him. Good night, your grace. I shall read you the rest tomorrow. The days gathered into weeks. Helena learned the rhythms of him, the way she had learned the rhythms of every difficult charge in a life spent earning her bread as other women's companions. She learned that he was sharpest in the mornings and gentlest in the late afternoon, when the light he could not see slanted long and gold through the curtains she had begun quietly to open. She learned that he had been an active man once, a rider and a swordsman and a builder of things, and that the worst of his suffering was not the darkness, but the idleness, the long uselessness of days that no longer asked anything of him. So she began to ask things of him. Your steward cannot read your grandfather's hand, she announced one morning, and there is a question of the eastern fields that no one but you can answer. I have brought the ledgers, I shall read you the figures, and you shall tell me what your grandfather intended. I am blind Miss Croft, not a clerk. You are the Duke of Belmonte, she said, and your tenants are owed an answer. I do not see what your eyes have to do with your memory or your judgment. Both, I am told, were once considerable. She heard him exhale half a laugh and half exasperation, but he answered the question, and the next one. And by the end of the week the steward was coming to the drawing-room each morning, and the Duke was managing his estate again, his sharp mind unclouded, his voice gaining a strength it had lost, and Helena sat beside him with the ledgers open and read him the columns of figures in her steady voice, and watched a man come slowly back to life. The change in the house was a thing the servants spoke of among themselves, at first in disbelief and then in something like hope. The curtains in the drawing-room stayed open now. The fires were built up. A tenant who came to the door with a grievance was, for the first time in 2 years, granted an audience, and went away satisfied, telling everyone in the village that the Duke was himself again, that his judgment was as sound as it had ever been, sounder perhaps, for sorrow had taught him patience. And at the centre of every change was the quiet companion no one had expected to last a fortnight, who never raised her voice and never gave an order, and who had somehow, by asking the right things at the right hours, drawn a buried man back up into the light. You are doing something to my household, Miss Croft, the Duke observed one morning when the steward had gone. I cannot see it, but I can feel it. The place breathes differently. The servants laugh in the kitchens again. I had forgotten that houses were meant to make a sound. I have done nothing, Helena said, but treat the master of the house as a man with work to do, rather than an invalid to be tiptoed around. The rest the house did for itself, the moment it had a duke again. The moment it had you, he said very quietly, and then seemed to think he had said too much, and turned his scarred face away toward the window he could not see. It was in the walled garden that everything changed. She had been at Belmonte 2 months when she suggested it. The garden is overgrown, she said. Your aunt tells me it was your mother's, and that no one has walked it since your accident. It seems a shame. The roses are blooming over the wall and going to waste, and you have not breathed open air in 2 years. I will not be led about my own garden like an invalid, he said. Then do not be led, Helena said. Take my arm, as a gentleman takes a lady's, and we shall simply walk. There was a long silence. She had learned to wait through his silences, to let them be, and at last he rose from his chair and held out his arm, stiff and uncertain, a duke offering escort to a paid companion as though it were the most natural thing in the world. She placed her hand upon his sleeve, and she led him out into the light. The garden was a wilderness of roses. They had grown unchecked for 2 years, climbing the old brick walls and tumbling over the stone paths, and the air was thick and sweet with them. Helena walked the Duke slowly along the gravel, telling him what she saw, the white roses by the sundial, the red ones gone wild over the arbor, the bees moving heavy and golden in the warm afternoon. And the Duke turned his face up to the sun, and she watched the hard lines of him ease, and something in her own chest ached at the sight. Describe it to me, he said. All of it. Do not leave anything out. I find I want to see it through you." So she did. She told him how the late sun came slanting over the western wall and turned the white petals to gold at their edges. She told him how a single climbing rose had thrown itself clear across the broken sundial, as though time itself had been overgrown and forgotten here. She told him of the moss in the cracks of the path, soft and green, and of the swallows turning high overhead, and of the old stone bench beneath the arbor where, she imagined, a woman might once have sat with a small boy and taught him the names of flowers. The Duke listened to every word with his face turned to the warmth, and she saw something move in him that was very near to peace, and very near to grief, and could not tell, in the end, where one left off and the other began. "My mother used to bring me here," he said quietly. "Before, I had forgotten the smell of it." He stopped walking. His hand, she realized, had come to rest over hers where it lay on his sleeve. "Miss Croft, Helena, may I ask you something, and will you answer me honestly?" "Always," she said. "When you look at me," he paused, and she understood what it cost him to ask. "When you look at my face, what do you see?" Helena considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. She might have said something kind and false. The other companions would have. Instead, she lifted her free hand, slowly, and laid the backs of her fingers against the scar on his cheek, lightly, so he could feel exactly where she touched. He went very still. "I see this," she said softly, tracing the pale line with the gentlest pressure, from his temple to his jaw. "I see a mark of something terrible that happened to you, and that you survived. I do not look away from it, Your Grace, because it is part of you, and I have grown rather fond of all the parts of you." Her voice was steady, but her heart was not. "And I see a man whom the whole world calls fearsome and ruined, and who is in truth the kindest and most honorable man I have ever served, and who has decided to bury himself alive because he believes there is nothing left in him worth seeing." She let her hand fall away. "I see a man worth a great deal, sir. That is what I see." The Duke of Belmonte stood among his mother's roses with the sun on his scarred face, and for a long moment he did not speak at all. When he did, his voice was rough. "No one has touched my face since the accident," he said. "Not the surgeons, not my aunt, not one of them. They flinch from it. You did not flinch." "No," Helena agreed, "I did not." "Why?" She was quiet a moment. "Because there is nothing in you to flinch from," she said simply. "There never was. The world recoiled from a scar and called it recoiling from you, and you believed them. But I have sat beside you for 2 months, Your Grace, and I have come to know the man, and the man is not the scar. He never was." She heard him breathe, and then, slowly, carefully, the Duke raised his own hand and reached toward her, his fingers finding the air, searching, and she understood and went still, and let him find her. His fingertips touched her cheek, the way the blind learn the shape of the things they love, tracing the curve of her face, the line of her brow, the corner of her mouth, reading her as she had read to him through all the long mornings. "I have wondered," he murmured, "what you looked like. The others described you to me badly. They said plain. They said respectable." His thumb brushed the edge of her lips. "They were fools, every one. You are the loveliest thing that has come into this house in 2 years, and I did not need eyes to know it. I knew it the first day, when you would not weep, and would not pity me, and would not turn around." Helena's breath caught. They stood close among the roses, his hand cradling her face, hers come up without her quite deciding it to rest against his chest, and the whole green wild garden held its breath around them. "Helena," he said, "I am a scared and broken man, and the world has decided I am unmarriageable, and any sensible woman would tell me I have no right to ask what I am about to ask." His hand trembled against her cheek. "But you have given me back my life. You have given me back my estate and my garden and my own face and a reason to rise in the morning. I do not want a companion, Helena. I want a wife. I want you, not to read to me out of charity, but to walk beside me out of love, for as long as we are given. Will you stay? Not because my aunt engaged you, because I am asking. Will you have a blind and ruined Duke who can no longer even see your face? And Helena Croft, who had spent her whole life being useful to others and loved by none, lifted her hand and laid it once more against the scar on his cheek, gently, without flinching, and said the truest words she had ever spoken. "I will have you," she said, "scar and all. And as for seeing my face, your grace, you have read it with your hands more truly than any man who ever looked at it with his eyes. You see me better blind than the whole sighted world ever did." He bowed his head then and rested his brow against hers, and they stood together in the sun among his mother's roses, two people whom the world had set aside, holding to each other as though they had found at long last the thing they had each been missing. They were married quietly that autumn, in the small chapel on the estate, with the curtains of Belmont thrown wide for the first time in 2 years, and the sun pouring through every window. The Duke could not see the light, but he turned his face up to it all the same, and he held his wife's hand through the whole of the service, and when the moment came he found her face with his fingers, unerring now, and kissed her before God and his astonished aunt and the small gathering of tenants who had come to wish their Duke joy. The county said it was a pity, of course. The county always said something. A great Duke, they murmured, wed to a penniless companion, and he could not even see what he had got. But the tenants of Belmonte knew better. They had watched their Duke come back from the dead, and they knew the woman who had gone into the dark after him and led him out. And every afternoon for the rest of their long lives, when the light went gold and slanting, the Duke of Belmonte took his wife's arm and walked with her in his mother's garden among the roses, and she told him what she saw, and he turned his scarred face to the sun, and neither of them was ever lonely again.